Okay, sorry for the technical glitches. It always seems to okay that something has to happen. But anyway, I think we are okay now, and we should be able to get started. So we'll start off with some housekeeping rules. Firstly, mute your microphone when you're not talking. You may leave your video on. Obviously, internet bandwidth can be a challenge. And then use the chat for questions and answers and comments. During the session, we'll also look to have a quick discussion on the different points. And most importantly, let us enjoy ourselves. So we'll get started into it. So as mentioned before, the main theme for today is incident investigation, how to conduct it. So incident investigation, the question that I want to pose to everyone, I'm sure you can answer it to yourself. Are you investigating all your incidents? Hello. Or is it easier to look away from these incidents and not know them? Often we hear that no incidents are taking place in our work. The guys are very safe. No one has said anything. So the question is it true that they are not happening, or you don't know about them because you have a culture where the workers do not bring up or report their incidents? So why incident investigation? So before we go any further, I'd like to define what an accident is and differentiate it from an actual incident. So an accident, by definition, is an unexpected event which results in an injury to people or damage to equipment or the surrounding environment. So there's an associated cost that comes with it, and there's an outcome, there's a result. Whereas on the other hand, the incident, by definition, is also an unexpected event, but there is potential for injury or damage to equipment. So the difference becomes the aspect of potential against the actual. So from experience, majority of accidents are focused by incidents. Near misses, or generally called close calls, would tend to eventually lead to an accident taking place. As a result, incidents should be reported, and all incidents should be investigated, no matter how many they are.
Sorry?
So, accident and incident. So for those that are sheep practitioners, you should be familiar with this. Started off as Heinrich's triangle, and then it was modified by Baird in 1976. And there's been numerous versions or adaptations to the triangle. And essentially what this triangle tells us is that for a certain number of near misses, in this case, we've got 600, there's likely to be minor injuries that are going to occur, which in this case we have 30. And out of those 30, 10 are likely to lead into some severe injuries or more serious injuries. And out of those 10, there's a possibility or potential of having one or more fatalities. Now, as an incident, we've mentioned that we're looking at the potential. So for us, we look at the behavior X, the unsafe acts and conditions that exist in the workplace, or the unsafe acts that are completed by workers. From those, we could have possibly 10,000, increasing the risk of a near miss actually taking place. And from there, as you go up the triangle, you're likely to end up with a more serious incident taking place. So this emphasizes the need to investigate all incidents in the workplace. Okay. Looks like we've got a okay, let's see. Okay. So from there, for those that know the tip of the iceberg theory, if we overplace this and interpret it through the iceberg theory, you'll see that underneath the level of the water is where you have got a number of unsafe acts and conditions happening. And from there, it translates to near misses, leading to minor injuries, eventually we get to tip of the iceberg, which is the fatality. So to me, that sums up the importance of us investigating every incident in the workplace. So from it, we prevent future incidents, we identify and eliminate hazards, we also identify deficiencies that we have in our workplace, we comply with our regulatory requirements, as well as workers' compensation, and there's always a cost that is associated to the human capital. You know, no matter how minor an injury, it has got an impact. We also get to understand direct and indirect costs, and we also get to address the reputation risk that can come with incidents taking place. So the benefits of it, we're talking of prevention, we get to achieve or identify training requirements, we improve on our operations, and one important thing that we tend to miss out is on boosting the morale of workers and encouraging the employee participation. So that sums up to me why we should investigate every incident. So we move on to the next section, which talks about the investigation process, which is the main event. So the process to me is a 6-step process. I like to add one more, being the 7th. We start off with the worker reporting the incident. But in any case, there's immediate actions that need to be data collection, data presentation, data analysis, and finally reporting the incident and the recommendations that go along with it. So as I mentioned, to me, it starts off with the worker reporting the incident. How the workers respond can be very critical in regards to the outcome of the incident. So reporting an escalation, that is to me a now issue. That needs to take place in a timely manner, particularly with severe injuries. You might actually make a huge difference to the impact that the incident can have on someone. But accuracy of report is important. The incident description, very brief. Is there any injured persons, any immediate actions taken or any immediate actions required, the location of the incident, and further support required. So it's important that you train your workers to know how to report or to escalate these incidents. The key thing for me is the time. So the immediate response, that in some instances can be a life and death situation. So as a priority, we should always care for the injured workers. Move the injured workers if there is imminent danger for further harm. Switch off any equipment, power or other utilities that need to be turned off. Remove any hazards that may cause further harm. Apply first aid if you are trained to do so. And do not remove anything in the area. As a priority, always consider your own safety. Often, you know, with adrenaline, shock, and other things that can occur following an incident, we naturally respond by actioning. So as a result, sometimes we forget taking additional precautions, but it's very important for one to consider their own safety. That way we prevent having another incident or more injured personnel. So securing the scene. So securing the scene is important, particularly when it comes to allow the investigation team to be able to make considered conclusions from an investigation. So preserve the incident. We all will use barrier tape, the red and white tape or the yellow tape, prevent spoliation of evidence. And where there's a fatality or very serious injury with potential for fatality or disablement, that will likely require multi-party investigations. And you're now talking about the police coming in or the local authorities. So it becomes critical to ensure that nothing is moved. So preserving the scene, let's do that. If you have to post someone at the incident site, then let's do that to ensure that there's no interference with any materials in the area. So then thereafter comes your preliminary data gathering. So carry out a site inspection, and in some cases, the most senior person that is in an area is the supervisor and co-workers. So we need to understand the jurisdictions of that investigation in line with the policies of the company. Where the statutory authorities that need to be involved, they need to be done in a timely manner. And also we need to consider the authorization to enter the site, particularly the barricaded area, where we look at site management and consideration for the external stakeholders. So once we've done that and there's preliminary information that's been gathered, the scene is secured, we then move on to the investigation planning. Now, depending on the level of the investigation that is being carried out or the level of the incident, determines the level of planning that is required. But a very pertinent question that always pops up is who should perform the investigation? So the supervisors should look after the minor accidents that take place. Near misses and low consequence incidents. We're talking of things like slips, trips, and falls. Those sit within the jurisdiction of the supervisor. Then the senior management should partake in the more serious incidents, the near misses that could have resulted in higher consequences. So we're now talking of dropped objects of height. We're now talking of incidents in confined space. We're talking of working at heights. So that differentiation is important. And I always encourage organizations to have these investigation protocols defined within their policies. So the organization. So a lower level incident, we're talking of first aid treatment, minor reversible injuries. We're looking at single stakeholder complaints, low property damage, minimal to no business interruption, low volumes of hazardous materials, and minimal impact to business operations. So less than 1 day. So that to me, a supervisor with co-workers with the assistance of the SHE team would be able to undertake that investigation. Then we start looking at minor incidences where there's medical aid situation, medical support required, reversible health effects, possibility of multiple stakeholder complaints, impact to business operations of say 2 days. Similarly, support with the safety department, the supervisor and co-workers, and perhaps you start having crossover with managers or superintendent level, middle management levels getting involved. We then look at the moderate incidents. We're now talking of lost time injuries, disabling injuries that become more serious. Exposure limits being longer with longer term effects, greater business operations impact. So now in this case, we're now looking at addition of your managers and unit heads. So then we start moving on to the more serious incidents that are taking place. So we're now looking at high incident level, where we're talking of permanent disability, complaints that result in loss of stakeholder support. So we're now looking at organizational where the potential impact to the business goes beyond what would generally be expected of basic incident. So at this point, I would expect site management to respond quickly. There's consideration for now bringing in external support, even though within the company or consultants, and the final level being the very high incident where you're talking at director level, manager, unit head, you're now talking of external bodies being involved, particularly where there's a fatality. So that criteria must be defined. We shouldn't be spending time trying to identify who should be part of the investigation team. That exercise should already be, or that system should already be in place. So as part of our planning, there's the preparation. The worst thing that could happen is that someone goes to carry out an investigation, they go to the site and they realize they don't have stationery or they've got no photos, they need to come back. Now, depending on the level of the incident, sometimes one of the priorities is getting back into production. Now, it's fair to say that safety first, but in many instances, it's natural that, some incidents where there's a lot of push to carry them out in an efficient and faster manner so that production resumes. It may not be the right culture, but that's what also happens. You may need a torch, if particularly on night shift, locks, lockout, take out, if any permits are running for the particular area. So be prepared. The longer you take, the greater the odds of the scene being spoiled. You also have people in the area that will be walking around or doing other work. So it's about time. Quicker action means better outcomes. So your toolkit, we're talking of barricade tape. Make sure that you yourself are wearing the correct PPE. Otherwise, as an investigator, you end up with an incident of your own. So safety glasses, tape measures if you need one, sample bags, particularly say material has been dislodged, mask, especially now at the time of COVID, a mask is mandatory. So ensure that your toolkit is complete. That way, again, you won't suffer any delays. So planning the meeting. So establish the investigation base. Now, again, it's dependent with the level of incident. So ensure there is sufficient meeting rooms available, mobilize any additional support that may be required, the administration support that may also be required, and access to any hardware, now talking of computers, cameras, phones, and the like. So still with planning the meeting. So for your high-level incidents, particularly where there's external stakeholders, an incident brief from site management becomes important. It then becomes important to understand, to have a background of the operations, a current understanding of the timeline in terms of what has happened or what's been established to have happened as of that point, any data that has been collected, including photographs. And one area where they ends up with confusion is the terms of reference of the investigation, particularly where external consultants are involved or colleagues from other operational sites. So it's important to understand the purpose of the investigation, the stakeholder requirements, any confidentiality requirements that come with it, the boundaries of the investigation, the timing of the investigation, any key points of contact. The last thing you want is to be running around trying to establish how to get particular things or information or access to particular persons, and the reporting process. I always say that a single point of contact is important for the investigation team, particularly for the more serious ones. That way time is not lost, and it also minimizes the odds of different interpretations taking place. Or the spread of rumors. So the action plan. So the investigation team must then look at reviewing the available information. They must also brainstorm as a team the appropriate action plan, identify any checklist items, assign roles and responsibilities, and any templates that are generally used within the company. So moving on from there. So any comments or questions so far? Hello? Okay, I'll assume that everything is in order.
Hello, Fungai?
So come. Huh?
Hello?
Okay. So now moving on. So as part of the investigation, we want to understand, we carry out a process called the 5 whys. I like to add the how, making them 6 steps. So who, what, when, where, why, and the how. That's mainly what we're after when we're carrying out an incident investigation. So the first step being the who. There's a lot of questions that we may ask. Now, we're not going to go through each and every one of these, but I'm sure you'd be familiar with many of them. And this presentation, I'm sure, will be availed as well, so you can always deep dive. So who normally does the task? Who was working with the person, him or her? Who was first to arrive at the scene? Who reported the incident? And who rendered any first aid or medical treatment to start off? And then the investigation then evolves. So we start looking at who was involved in the TA chain, what was the scope or who identified the scope of work, and who planned the task itself. all these can be stakeholders or important people to interview as part of the investigation. For the what was the injured employee's explanation? That's a very important question. Or alternatively, what happened? That would be being asked to any involved person or persons. What was their explanation? What were they doing at the time of the accident? What was the nature of the injury that took place? What operation was being performed? So all these are questions that go towards piecing the puzzle together. More questions on the what PPE was required for the job? What were the condition of the equipment and could it have contributed? What environmental conditions contributed towards the incident? And also another one that tends to pop up is what other tasks were taking place at the time? Simultaneous operations. So the next W is the when. When did the accident and incident occur? When was the incident reported and escalated? That time frame, as we mentioned before, from the incident taking place, being reported to the supervisor, and then being escalated up the organizational chain. That time frame is important. When did the employee begin employment? We're now talking of the experience level. When was the specific task training completed? Again, was the person trained to do the job? When did the supervisor last visit the job? We're now looking at supervision at the workplace. Where did the incident take place? That's I guess an obvious question. But beyond that, we look at where was the employee positioned when the incident took place? Where were the eyewitnesses? And where was the supervisor at the time? The why. So why did the accident or incident occur? Why did co-workers do what they did to respond? Why was the employee in that position? Why was the team short-staffed if there were less numbers, less workers from the normal? Why was the task not rescheduled? An instance where a job is particularly done on day shift and doesn't happen and is done at night shift. Why did conditions come together at that very moment, resulting in the incident? And the how. How did the accident occur? How did the employee get injured? Sometimes the severity of the injury may suggest or indicate that, more complications might have taken place during the course of the job. How could co-workers have prevented it? How could witnesses have better helped? And how could the accident have been prevented? So those are the pertinent questions that come from the 5 Ws plus 1 H. So at this point, is there any questions or comments? Hello?
Hello, Fungai. Can you hear me?
Mr. Maroa.
Yes, I just wanted to add something. During the accident investigation, people should remember that our colleagues or the other workers are watching while we're doing the investigation, which means we should be very sympathetic and also very thorough. We do not give off the image that we are giving a half-baked result or a half-baked investigation, because we will send out an image that we are prioritizing production over safety, therefore sending a bad image to the other employees. So we should always remember that aesthetics and also the perspective of other colleagues does matter. So we should always do a thorough job and also never to seem like we're rushing it.
Thank you for that contribution, Mr. Maroa. I think, that point that you raised, that we should not seem rushed, is, the way we present ourselves as investigators is what gives the conclusion that the workers make. Do they take the investigation seriously? If you present yourself as mediocre, particularly, for example, you arrive at your scene without a camera, and all of a sudden there's a delay of 30 minutes to take photos, it gives the wrong impression. So the precedent we set, what we display, is how the workers who look is the perception they'll have of the investigation team. So thank you for that, Mr. Maroa. Any other contributions? Yes, Taurai.
Thank you so much. I think my issue here is maybe we need to invest more on the issue of reporting, where mostly we might have the best procedures in place, but always when there's a human element aspect, you find, you get details from this of accidents like you have highlighted on your slides. But when the worker has violated something or he didn't follow the procedure, there is always simulation of the incident before the actual team can assemble. There will also be a common agreement within the parties involved, the injured and the witnesses, to say, let's frame or let's put it in this way. So at the end of the day, we invest a lot of time in investigating an accident, yet we are not really dealing with the actual issue that happened. Why? After a period of time, that's when you get the details of actually what happened on that day. But here, the remedial action plan and your recommendations will be much focused on what the simulation was like. Let's, for example, an accident site with the people involved can be even tampered with. For the team working there, maybe they know it was a shortcut. They tamper with that environment, simulate a correct position, yet it's not the situation. With that in mind, how do we deal with that? Because I think most of our action plans sometimes are not fitting the actual scenario when the accident happened.
Well, thank you for that, Taurai. I think on that one, this is where the timing, how quick the response or commencement of the investigation becomes critical. Now, before we get to that point, organizational culture is also an important aspect in all of this. So, for instance, if you look at it, where workers are comforted or given confidence that the objective of the investigation is not to find blame, but to establish what has transpired. You hope that from that, workers would not conspire to to present an alternative of what has transpired of the incident. But having said that, the speed in which the investigation commences, the accuracy of the information being gathered, and the way the investigators present themselves plays a key role in fleshing out those instances. And now I'm going to cover data collection, so we'll deep dive more into that. And hopefully you will come out with more confidence in terms of how we manage those situations. Any additions or further comments?
Yeah.
I see, Mr. Maro, you have your mic on.
Oh, yeah. Mama.
Okay, no, you must be having an alternative conversation. Ms. Taurai, did you have any further comments? Okay, no, that's okay. So we'll carry on. So the next stage of the incident investigation process is now your data collection. And a simple method, but effective, is people, with the P being the people. So the elements that come with it is, who are the involved persons? Were there any additional associated persons? And who are the witnesses that were there? And the methods in which we collect the data is the conduction of interviews and the written statements. We also look at the environment, the housekeeping conditions, the actual incident scene, what was the weather, Were there any simultaneous operations that were taking place? We collect the data through inspections and observations. And this is where your collection of photos becomes critical. What was the condition of the equipment? You know, the tools, the plants, any vehicles that were in use. The operation, was the equipment operating within its parameters? When was it last inspected or tested? What were the procedures? Now, procedures is always interesting. We have our documented procedures, and then we have the informal procedures that tend to establish themselves. So we review those documents and consider where those procedures complied to. Then we've got the organizational aspects. Now, this is the bigger monster. You know, do we have procedures? What is the culture in the workplace? Training, how is it conducted? And the like. So we'll deep dive further into the people, the data collection. So when it comes to people, people make part of the accident causation method. Your workers get to interact with the materials, the task, the instructions or directions from management, and the environment in which they are working in. So from it, we have to conduct interviews. Now, it's important to identify the relevant persons. It's also important to prioritize who is being interviewed first. Have a prioritization criteria. Now, for instance, the person involved, if they're available, then to me, they become the first person that is to be interviewed. The other question to ask yourself is, are you the best person to conduct the interview? Who can confirm what you already know? If there's any technical aspects, is there any additional support that is required, whether it be internal or external? So we conduct these interviews by obtaining statements. To me, that's usually the first point of call. Then subsequent to that, you conduct your interview on a one-on-one basis. And preferably, for me, this is to be done at the scene, where you get better explanation from the involved person. And if you've got any further clarifications, they can be asked at that time. But in some instances, that option may not be available. So you need an office, a quiet office, where there's minimal traffic. The last thing you want is someone being investigated, people are walking past, and it makes them uncomfortable. So that's really important. So yes, so to me, the people aspect is critical, particularly when we involve emotions. So how do you conduct the interview? Remember, this is a fact-finding mission. It's not about blame. So you should always use open-ended questions. Do more listening than talking. And do not give any preference or indicate, undue support or draw any conclusions. Confirm the responses by the interviewee by asking back the questions or sounding back. Don't be shy to ask for possible causes, how it should have been. And one important aspect is always to advise that there's potential follow-up. Yes, we've had the interview, we have your vision of events of what transpired, but there's a possibility that we may come back for further clarifications. And also ask, does the interviewee have any question? Often the question, particularly where the involved person is present, is what happens is, do I still have my job? Because people start to worry. So always, I'll give them the opportunity to ask and give them reassurance that it's about identifying the facts so we prevent reoccurrence. And always thank the person you're interviewing. It's something that someone will appreciate, and it encourages them to cooperate. So continuing on with the people aspect. So the interview questions to ask: what was the sequence of events and what was their actions? Are they aware or familiar with any similar past incidents or near misses? What is the experience level of the individual and that of the team as well? Training requirements to operate the equipment and if they achieved them. Now, all these, particularly training requirements, even if you're given by the operator or by the involved person, you need to verify these with the training department. As of any limitations, whether it be individual, process, or equipment, is there any extenuating circumstances? Are they stressed, lack of sleep, production pressures? All of those are questions to ask as part of our data collection. Some of the other things to look at is then the position of the worker, the communication that took place, any additional instructions, whether they be the normal or outside the norm, pre-start checks, supervision, procedures, the incident history, experience and competency, the roster in which the guys were or the team was working under, and what transpired in the last 24 hours. It can trigger additional information, that 24 to 72 hours. Was it a new shift or the previous shift left? Or was there disturbance or misunderstanding amongst team members? The psychology and the physiology of involved persons is also another key question that is good to ask. Now, supervisors, I always say supervisors have the most difficult job. They are there to command and also have respect from their workers that report to them. They also represent the workers themselves, when workers have got requests, but equally, they're also the representative of management. So they are, between a rock and a hard place. But during incidents, they're usually the first person to be notified by one of their team members. He or she should also complete an accident statement, regarding the details of notification and any actions that were taken. Sometimes they may be involved in terms of, what transpired. So they'll then make additional statements to that effect. And they may be, or most likely will be able to provide information on what transpired before, any earlier behaviors or activities of involved persons, and any other issues that may be taking place, particularly the personal issues, depending on the relationship in which they have with their team members. So, and in some instances, they're the investigator or form part of the investigation team. So that's where it becomes critical to understand, what role they played, and what information they can avail. So the investigation review should consider if actions by the supervisors were in line with the expectations. It's not about glossing over or going around what is transpired or the decision-making process, but it's about understanding how it could have contributed to the incident itself. So yeah, it's great to be a supervisor, a worthy experience, particularly for upcoming practitioners or technical persons. It gives you a different perspective. So the next area we look at after people is also the environment, most importantly, the scene. So photos are a must. You can never take enough photos. What was the impact of the conditions in the area? Any sudden changes in the environment that caused or contributed to the incident? Conditions at the particular time of the incident, not what the general conditions are. We're talking of what were the conditions when the incident transpired. So event reconstruction, this is something that I've seen being attempted to be done. And in many cases, it leads to more complications than not. In my view, incident event reconstruction should take place if it's absolutely necessary. The last thing we want is to create a repeat incident or a new incident whilst recreating what has already transpired. So do it if it's absolutely necessary. Avoid operating any equipment unless it's in a controlled state. So we're talking of your risk assessments and your isolations. And this is one of those things where, you need to bounce it off, your senior management, and, you must have clear justification as to why that is necessary. So yeah, that's that point around reconstruction of events. So other things to consider, the housekeeping in the area, the wind, the weather conditions, temperature, noise, hazardous substances, and again, simultaneous operations. Was anyone working above? Was there a projectile from other works nearby? Those are things to consider around the environment. So the next aspect is the equipment. How do the equipment operate? It's, plants are the last, plants are a fixed thing. Once they are built, the upgrade requires capital. And often when they are built, they've got set parameters in which they should operate. But as the business grows, we tend to start pushing those boundaries. If it's 90 liters per minute, you start looking at, particularly your operations personnel, start looking for the 100. So that's an important thing to look at. You upgrade one piece of equipment, what impact does it have on downstream or upstream operations? So what was the state of the materials or equipment? How were the materials or equipment identifiable? What specific PPE was being used for the job? Was it the appropriate one, or was it the normal PPE, or was the additional PPE required above, beyond the normal? So equipment, we consider the design. We spoke about parameters, the construction aspect. These are things you can't change. Testing and commissioning, your commissioning, once the plant is built, it's now there. But after shutdown, it's important to retest and recommission, I'd call it. And then another area that we need to look at is the maintenance of the equipment. Any preventative maintenance, how often are inspections done? And when we start pushing the boundaries of parameters, generally it comes with modifications. So we need to consider what impact did those modifications have, and was there management of change that accompanied. So different aspects to look at. Modifications, I'll touch on the modifications in particular. Management of change, was it done? What was the impact to operations, maintenance, reliability, and the inspection schedule? Was safety and health aspects considered, and what were the effects to downstream operations? And again, the costs, and this area often requires the engagement of stakeholders where modifications have taken place. It may involve engineering, the operations, the maintenance team, procurement, various stakeholders. So that needs to be looked at. And I always encourage companies that they should have a management of change process in place to capture, because often that history left in the minds of people tends to be forgotten, or when workers leave or move on, they go with that history. So part of the data collection, we then look at the procedures. Important to identify what procedure was being used, and if the adherence to that procedure. If there is no procedure, then we look at the task hazard analysis. Was one completed? And what was the quality of that task hazard analysis? What were the job steps and the conditions? And were there any deviations? What tools and materials were available and were they used? How did safety devices work and were they appropriate, particularly where isolations are involved? So procedures, I think we touched on this. I won't go through into major details, but their use, the content adequacy, the appropriateness, validation, and the control of those procedures. Often you've got official procedures in the system, and then you've got the out-of-date procedures that tend to circulate, that are in circulation. Looking at organization, who is responsible for safety, health, and environment? Without a doubt, it is management's legal responsibility. In any investigation, we need to consider the role of the supervisors and the role of management. Ultimately, yes, workers play a role, but that responsibility never shifts from management. So the questions to ask: what safety rules and documented procedures are available? And beyond that, are they involved? Are they enforced? What supervision was in place at the time? What training was provided and is it valid? What regular inspections and maintenance are carried out? Was the equipment operating within parameters? And were there any modifications that took place? These are some of the questions to ask, and there's more. You know, we then need to consider the culture in place, the leadership, the communication that takes place. We look at staffing levels, the provision of equipment. Under organization, we look at the systems in place, the policies, the knowledge of hazards, official and unofficial procedures, provision of audits. So after that, it now becomes the data presentation. You've gathered all your information about the people involved. You looked at the equipment, the environment conditions at the time. You looked at the organizational factors. So it's now about compiling and presenting that data. So before we move on, is there any additions or comments? It's either I'm doing a very good job or I am boring. Yes, Mr. Ranga.
Thank you, Fungai, for the opportunity to speak. I would just want to say you're doing a very good job, but I would love to leave a challenge. Please remind me at the end of the presentation. I don't want to divert you for now. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, Ranga. So we all remind each other we've got a challenge ahead of us. Okay, so if there's no further, I will continue on. So the tools for presenting. So we have flowcharts and timelines. Various types of timelines. You know, you got event and condition charts. You've got time-ordered event charts, and then for flow charts, you got your incident trees and, you know, all sorts of tools. For me personally, I like to keep it short and simple. You know, the simpler it is, the better the participation and engagement I find. So I like to use a simple timeline and 5 whys. Why? Because it's simple, tends to be effective, can be quite comprehensive. It gives you some flexibility, and also can be engaging, particularly for an investigation team that's put together, which may have people from different departments or different or from other operations. And it's inexpensive way of doing it. And you know, you get to do it in a timely manner. And keep it short and simple. So, you know, we'll summarize this incident. You know, this is an incident of 2 operators going to for break or night shift. They arrive when the light switch is on the on position. Well, they don't know it's on the on position, but there is no light. The light is not working. The operator, one of the operators, proceeds to go and get a fluorescent tube from one of the workstations and hands over the fluorescent tube to one of the operators, who will call operator 1, who has already removed tables and set up a chair. Operator 1 proceeds to climb onto the chair and starts to change the fluorescent tube. So operator 1 grabs the fluorescent tube, and whilst inserting the light, he suddenly jumped off the chair, managed to land on his feet, informs the other operator that he has received an electric shock, but he is fine. So operator 2 switches off changes the switch into the off position, changes the light bulb. Operator 1 is already having the meal. The 2 proceed to finish their break and return to their workstations. Moments later, or a period at about 10:45, operator 1 and another operator who identifies as operator 3 meet at a storage tank that they have to clean out in preparation for maintenance. And whilst cleaning the tank, operator 1 collapses. Emergency services is called in, and upon arrival, they do their stabilization and subsequently take operator 1 to hospital. So operator 1 is the one who received the electric shock. Operator 2 changed the light bulb. operator 3 was present when operator 1 collapsed. So I'm only using this event for illustration purposes. I hope you caught that. So in presenting the data, as I mentioned, simple timeline. For me, it's about putting events based on the information gathered in a particular order following the time. So in this instance, we start off at 9:05, where operators find lights not working. Then the operator 2 collects the fluorescent tube. At 9:20, operator 1 climbs onto a chair and replaces the fluorescent tube. At 9:22, operator 1 receives an electric shock. But they decide to proceed on and complete their work. Operator 2 is, to complete their break. Operator 2 has changed the light switch. That was at 9:25. At 10:45, an hour and 20 minutes later, operator 1 collapses. So I like to present following sequential and labeling the times to create better understanding. Now in this incident, for me, the first report should have been done at 9:22 with when operator 1 received the electric shock. But in any case, for the timeline, up to 11:30, the worker is taken to hospital. So after the timeline, we then conduct our 5 whys. So our 5 whys, based on the timeline events, we go onto each and we ask ourselves, what happened? Why did it happen? When why can no longer be answered, it's either more information is required for the investigation, or there's an organizational factor, or it's beyond the control of the organization. So in theory, the 5 whys, we use the 5 whys to get to the root cause, but realistically, some instances require more or less whys. So looking at our timeline that we established, the green is the 5 whys conducted for each. So for example, at 9:05, the operator found the light not turning on at the lunchroom. So why did that happen? The light stopped working and was not replaced. Why was that the case? Why was it not replaced? There were no spy bulbs available. Why was that? Well, it occurred towards the end of previous crew shift, right? You continue on, you look at another one, particularly operator 1 receives electric shock. Why did that happen? Switch was in the on position when it was changing bulb. Why did that occur? Why is the switch in the on position? Well, there was no indicator for on or off. Why was that? It's an old style switch that was in place. And then we proceed. Now, another good one is operator 1 and 2 discuss the electric shock and there's no escalation or reporting. Why did that happen? Well, operator 1 felt it was a minor shock. And then it turns out that operators 1 and 2 were new on site and they've been present for less than 3 months. So again, so you go through in each event and you undertake your 5 whys. So in this case, at 10:56, operator 3 arrives at Okay, so how the event then is considered to have transpired in the field when operator 1 collapsed. There was no radios to call, so there was a time lapse with the reporting of the incident. So at 10:48, 10:45, operator 1 collapsed. 10:48, operator 3 moved operator 1 outside the barn. And at 10:56, which is about 8 minutes later, is when the supervisor was notified, who subsequently notified emergency services. So again, why did operator 3 arrive at the supervisor's office 8 minutes later? Well, operators had no radios. Why? Not enough radios for everyone. Why? Well, there's a long lead time for new radios that have been ordered. So you have to undertake that 5 why until it ceases to go further. So once you've done the you've done your timeline and you've done your 5 whys, the next stage then becomes the analysis of that data that is presented. So the key things to consider is what were the contributing factors. It's important to identify the non-contributing factors, and then what were the absent or failed defenses, what were the individual actions that may have taken place. We then look again to our task and environmental conditions and the organizational factors. So it's now about reviewing your timeline in 5 whys, and identifying those. So in this instance, for illustration, so there was a mention of that it occurred towards the end of shift and it was not reported. So that's a contributing factor. Another contributing factor is maybe the individuals did not follow procedures when it came to reporting the first electric shock transpiring. The old style switch, in this case, it transpired that there was an action from a previous incident 2 years before to replace old style switch, the old style switch. Now that never transpired, so that becomes a contributing factor. So I like to do my investigations using a flip chart and poster notes, because you can have one color that shows the sequence, another color for your 5 whys, and then once you identify your contributing factors, you use another color to replace those. So subsequent to that, once that is established, the contributing factors, then the next stage is the reporting and the recommendations. I'll give the floor an opportunity to make contributions about the 5 whys. Any comments or contributions from the floor? All right, so I'll proceed. So the next stage is the reporting and the recommendations. So at this point, we've done our data gathering, we've done our data presentation, we've done our timeline and 5 whys. So the next step now becomes the reporting. So what is an investigation without a report? Now, often, you get feedback that, oh yes, no, we looked into it and it's all verbal. Well, it's important to document these things. It's important to capture what was the background information, where and when the accident occurred, who and what were involved, the operating personnel, the witnesses, if any, account for the accident, what transpired, the sequence of events, your timeline, the extent of the damage. We're now looking at the outcomes, the level of the accident, and what were the energy sources. So it's important to summarize, to give a good summary that, gives true reflection of what transpired. It's important to have a discussion, just like you're writing a composition, how and what were the direct causes, any indirect causes, so your unsafe acts and conditions, and the basic contributing factors. And this is where your management, culture and policies come into play. So again, what transpired is the main thing to come out of this. Now, where there's any external reporting for your very serious incidents, where there's disablement or irreversible damage, or in a worst case scenario, fatality or fatalities, obviously that now requires the involvement of your organizations. For example, in Zimbabwe of NASA. So for that, I will say one point of contact, and not that, it ensures consistency. And any follow-up to be done through one channel, particularly where that communication happens with external personnel. This person must be a senior level employee to undertake this communication. They understand the policies, the background, the implications. And the last thing you want is that you present wrong information and then it turns out to be otherwise. It doesn't make your regulators happy. It can give an impression of there was attempts to cover up. Now, contact with regulators in particular must be timeous and it should be immediate. And often there's a prescribed or specified time frame. Keep it short and simple and focus on the facts. And so third parties, that need to be notified. So now we're looking at family of the workers, parents or guardians or siblings, other stakeholders who may be impacted by the incident. Now, this is where, your emotional intelligence comes in. And it's a good idea to pick the right person. They may not be directly involved with the investigation or the leadership. Maybe perhaps they've got a closer relationship with the involved person or are known to the involved person's family. This is a very, very important aspect. If ever you think it's an easy thing, just try on your own how you would deliver a message to a colleague's family and see how you go at that. It's one of the worst things that one would have to do. So yeah, so put a lot of thought in that. So the recommendations, so identify the actions to address the contributing factors. And in some instances, you have situations where it may not be a contributing factor, but it's something that's identifiable, that is an issue within the organization. So that also needs to be addressed. So you need to prioritize the actions that come out of it, prioritize the immediate, the short, the medium, and the long-term implementation, taking into consideration of the ease of implementation. Now, one thing that I have observed from my experience is that the worst thing you can do is to assign actions to co-workers, whether they be internally or interdepartmental, without engaging them first. It is very important to get buy-in from the person you are assigning the action to. Why? Because one, they've got greater understanding, or they're responsible for that. They would understand the time frame involved or the ease of implementation. And naturally, if you just throw something at anyone without engaging them, chances are they're not going to be very passionate or enthused by it. So that engagement and buy-in is critical. So again, on recommendations for illustration purposes, so we say we've identified what the contributing factors in the previous incident were. So again, issue not reported or handed over. So that's an individual action. Some of the recommendations might include training. Stores return process too hard. Maybe that's the reason why, particular in this case, the fluorescent tube was found in someone's workstation. That's an organizational factor. So you now look at reviewing your store's return procedure. Now, one thing that often comes up a lot is disciplinary action. Some say that you should incorporate or advise that disciplinary action is recommended. Now, disciplinary procedures generally should be in place in any organization. It's not for the investigators or the investigation team to outline what the disciplinary action that should take place should be. We need to focus on productive actions, particularly when we share these with colleagues. The last thing we want is to give an impression that it's a blame game. So I always say that leave the disciplinary action to the direct supervisor or the one-up manager of that team, and the assistance of human resources. They can undertake that process. That is not within the criteria of the jurisdiction of the investigation team. We are about facts. So learnings, they are probably the most value that comes or that should come out of an investigation. So the purpose of the investigation is to learn from the incident and to prevent reoccurrence. So the incident, the investigation outcomes, and the actions must be shared and understood by all within the organization. Now, the mediums we can use include your toolbox talks, your safety meetings, your notice boards, emails. And why do we do this? Well, there's a moral obligation for everyone to understand what has transpired. It gives people comfort that they're going to work in a safe workplace. It also conscientizes your workers on expectations and the culture that we expect or trying to build up. And through this, you can also quantify the dollars and cents. There's a cost to everything. And that's the language that we all understand. Management are particularly about costs and spending, but workers will come to work to earn a salary so you can have a living. So dollars and cents, we understand that. Always encourage quantification as far as practicable or practical, to give greater understanding of the impact of the incident. So again, the actions, those without a doubt must be shared. There must be follow up on those actions. You know, it's one thing listing actions and people say, okay, great, we're going to sort this out, but there must be follow up in terms of progress of implementation, any roadblocks in its implementation. And importantly, after implementation, let's celebrate those things. They give confidence and participation of workers. So yes, again, so that's that for learnings from my end. Okay, looks like another technical glitch. Let me try and change the slide. There we go. So for me, you know, that's the investigation process from start to end. Most importantly, what we're after is the learnings out of this. So I'll open it up to the floor for any questions, comments, additions. Please, you're the audience. You know, we've had great participation so far. It would be great to hear others' experiences and what transpires out there.
Hello, Farai. Hello, Farai, can you hear me? Hello.
Hello, yes, you can go ahead, Mr. Maroa.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for a good presentation, a job well done. And also, I want to just mention that usually during accident investigations, when people hear or connotate human error, they tend to focus on just only the human, but we should always keep in mind that there are also other factors such as the environmental factors, the job factors, the organizational factors. These will all influence what we know as the human, because as human beings, we are reactive and we are emotional beings. So therefore, we should never forget that some of this human error that we see in organizations is contributed by the larger organizational factors and also environmental factors. And they're not just solely human errors or solely the responsibility of the human aspect alone, but also the organization itself and how you do things, how you plan your work, how you conduct yourselves as an organization, how you present yourself as an organization can also affect the aspect of human error. That should always be kept in mind when we're doing accident investigations.
Very great contribution on that. And look, you know, we can never underestimate what impact it can have on individuals, and not just the involved person, but the colleagues around in the workplace. They'll be seeing what's transpiring. So it's important to then focus on the core issues. Let's address those management issues. And so, yeah, no, so thank you for that. Tatenda, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for a detailed presentation that is very palatable to the audience. There is a lot of benefit that is coming from there. I have a few questions probably to you or to the participants. Then probably some additions. My point is on training on the recommendations. You have alluded to quite a number of data analysis whose recommendation was training. I take it that from the case that we had there for the fluorescent tubes, we have assumed that the operator most probably being the fact that they had poor induction, which was not very clear, but probably there was poor induction. But assuming that that is hazy, the workers may have been trained And probably one would then say the training was adequate. Is it possible to have any other recommendation that is not more like a training that actually is going to be felt, whose impact is going to be felt at individual level? I see training, yes, sometimes it is something that is, we are trying to kind of like portray a picture where there are no punitive measures that may emanate from investigations. And the tone, again, even in the presentation, shows that. But practically on the ground, can there not be any punitive measures that can come from an investigation, even if we may want to say it is not a witch hunting exercise? I will, where am I coming from? From experience on the ground, one, from also our legislation. You will notice that our legislation through the Accident Prevention and Works Compensation Scheme SI 68 of 1990, it basically requires the reporting of accidents and the investigation of accidents. But at the same time, because the Workers' Compensation Scheme, we may also compensate the guy. But if you read Section 9 of that statutory instrument, you find that if an investigation shows that the employer, for example, fails to do one or two things in the interest of health and safety, the employee is entitled to additional compensation, for example, which means additional compensation now, it is no longer coming from the workers' compensation scheme. It is now something that the organization has to fork out. Now, if the organization is going to fork out that, it means it is going to have a bearing on their finances. And people start talking, seeing that as a loss. And sometimes organizations do not just allow loss situations to proliferate in their organizations. They will try either to recover or foster something that will prevent those losses. Hence, probably the possibility of punitive measures as practicals. Then the other observation is on management factors. I'm happy that you have explained well that there are basic causes. I think on a scale of 0 to 100, you say the lack of management control may lead to a situation where you have unsafe conditions or unsafe acts proliferating. They become more like the indirect or immediate or moderate causes of the incidents of the top event, if you are using the trees that you were talking about. But in terms of the root cause, there seem to be a tendency of application of a lot of effort, resources, and time on the indirect and the direct causes. Then when you get to the management factors, for example, people just dash, or they do not have a lot of time to interrogate the management level, because obviously the guy who should be answering on behalf of that level is not a junior. He occupies the north pole of the organogram. And it is sometimes very difficult really to be very candid with them. I know the ideal is what you've said, but there is a problem probably in getting that. Where also am I coming from? We have said the moderate cases, for example, and the minor cases. I'm not saying we need to then call the MD to do everything, even the minor cases in investigations. But when you are investigating as a supervisor, individual, or the she-rep, like we have alluded to, or middle manager or junior employee, like those lower cases, then it points to organizational factors. Doesn't that also call the organizational factor level to also be interrogated or to also be quizzed? And in that instance, you may find yourself also now moving from your own sphere and getting to that high table to want to understand whether those are also deficiencies and or not. And how then do you do that? Or we end up then, for the minor cases or moderate cases, we end up playing keep chess, where we sacrifice pawns to save queens and kings.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nyenda. Yeah, say sacrifice pawns to save the queen. Okay. So from my understanding, there's three aspects. There's the training aspect, the compensation, and the management or the organizational factors. And particularly when it starts coming to the higher level, to the queens. So on the training, let me emphasize that that was just an illustration purposes. I think we can do better in terms of clarifying a few things on that scenario. But in any case, I think I understand where you're coming from, that often, training is the action that tends to come out, and we should have more punitive actions for the individuals. Now, one of the things to consider, retraining is very important without a doubt, particularly where there's individual and team action. But the key consideration becomes the level of experience of those involved. So for argument's sake, in this purpose for illustration, we've got two guys that were there for less than 3 months. Now, within that 3 months, you've done your induction, you've been shown how to walk around site, your own site, but perhaps and in your induction, it includes that, there's a reporting procedure, report every incident and so forth. Equally, there's an aspect of the fact that, for argument's sake, in this illustration, that the guy is worried about his job, he might lose his job, so he's on probation and wants to preserve that. So, you can, if training is appropriate, let's use that. The punitive actions, to me, this is where your disciplinary action comes in. And I tend not, and I always advise that it's not about spelling out in the investigation that this is, this is what has to happen, or this individual must be fired, or, whatever punitive action. There's a process for that. And for me, it's about identifying that, look, this individual didn't follow the process. The process is clear in terms of our procedures for reporting incidents. They didn't. Right. That individual has got a supervisor. They've got a one-up manager or supervisor, who I think this is where the involvement in the review of incidents becomes critical. Because then you can then commence or initiate any disciplinary actions that transpire. Now, naturally, it's going to come out, once that disciplinary process transpires, because, there's colleagues, people are going to share information. But it's about, for me, preserving the culture of building up the positive culture, that it's not a witch hunt. It's about, if you clearly articulate in the sharing of the information on how the incident transpired, it becomes abundantly clear that there were individual team actions that significantly contributed to this incident. Their level of breach is what then determines the punishment level per se. But let's keep that as a process separate to the investigation process. On the issue of compensation, again, the rules generally, I won't say they're clear cut, but the prescriptions that come out of the compensation bodies tend to make it clear in terms of what to expect. Once you start getting fined, there's usually a good reason for why that is happening. So, this is where it becomes important to ensure you got the right systems in place as an organization. That's your responsibility, the right training, the right level of control. And to me, that's what emphasizes why management should prioritize safety and health. On the management, the organizational factors on the application, it's, the thing for me on this aspect is the culture in an organization. A mature culture will understand and appreciate that we are not saving queens. It's about understanding what has transpired. We should definitely consider the roles that the supervisor or the management has done, or the organizational factors, how they contribute. So for example, if no procedure exists, right? So for example, for argument's sake, there's two individuals that did not report. If there's no, in the induction, if it doesn't address or mention that all incidents must be reported, it's unfair to be holding them to account. And this tends to happen a lot you know, where you hear, oh, we've never been told that this is the requirement. And sometimes you've got a procedure, but it's never been rolled out. You know, so that is a culture thing. And again, if everyone understands, and this is where your training becomes critical, particularly at management level in terms of, you know, what culture should be achieved, what are the responsibilities at the different levels, particularly the management themselves. And if you've got the right culture, it's, you know, if someone is done wrong in management, they need to be held to account for that. You know, and that needs to be understood. But if we have a culture of glossing over on the role of management and ignoring, then again, this is where your workers start keeping quiet about incidents they have. Because why? They are then sacrificed for the preservation of others. So if someone is to be held to be account, it's a culture thing. We need to build that culture. I hope that responds to your comments, Mr. Nyenda, and I'll open it to the floor, or you, Tatenda.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you've answered it very well. I just want to just make a follow-up. This is not a question, but this is now a comment, just also to add from my observation. I'm actually happy in your last sentence or so. You have said we must then even make the top people accountable. We are not going to actually exonerate them. I normally want to give practical cases. You know, when we talk about organizational factors, normally people, in terms of their practical interpretation of this, they would think there are deficiencies at organizational level, which is very fine, but the deficiencies at organizational level are showing the deficiencies in responsibility. I think in basic management, the issue of definition of roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and authorities is very critical, and we get that in all management. And we are saying it must be clear that on organizational factors, when there is a deficiency in organizational factors, somebody is accountable, just like the operator who had some gaps. So if there are gaps, if there is no procedure, we need to say who is accountable. And what then happens to that person, if it is training, if it is punishment, if it is whatever that we will do, it has to be very clear. If there is no resource, if there is no policy, we do not want to live in an investigation that say it was an organizational factor. Yes, it was an organizational factor, meaning that it is cutting across. There was no defense at organizational level. It is just unfortunate that the guys who were victims during that day were just victims, but it could have occurred to everybody because the organization was totally not in control. But when the organization is totally not in control, just like a family, the head of the family must actually be accountable. Much as they would want to be associated with success. I think in society, ladies and gentlemen, we really to borrow it from society. They say success has so many fathers, but failure is an orphan. So you claim paternity of good safety performance, but the moment there is an accident, you would want to talk about organizational factors that will not trace to you, and you actually want to order a DNA, whether you actually say, I am not the father of this of this thing. So that is where when we have a soft spot for the top level because of how we label organizational factors. It will seem like it is unavoidable, yet it must point to an accountable person. If you read clause 5.1 of ISO 45001, sorry, I am into standards. I want to refer to standards because they talk about this. Top management shall take accountability shall demonstrate leadership and commitment by taking accountability of the effectiveness of the occupational health and safety management system so that it achieves its intended outcomes. So the intended outcomes are prevention of injuries and illnesses. If those happen through a minor accident, a major moderate accident, a major accident, they must be accountable and they really must be quizzed without any apology. I think that will actually foster some discipline. Even if there is a consequence, I've seen in mines people fired because SI 109 is clear that the mine manager is responsible and accountable for the health and safety. So if a drill rig operator were to get injured, the top manager is going to be very tossed to the mines inspectorate, and they can actually even fine. That can also influence behavior. But I think, in all fairness, you have given a good account, but we may also be a little bit tough on this high level. The North Pole must be also fired.
No, yeah, thank you, Mr. Yeda. I think you've addressed that issue extensively and really well. And look, I think it's very clear who's responsible for safety and health, just like all the other factors in the workplace. Finance, its management, the performance of the operations, the targets. Yes, everyone is a stakeholder, but that top executive and senior middle management, they are responsible for all aspects of the business, and that includes your safety and health. Thank you for that contribution. Any other takers, comments, additions?
Yes, right. Okay.
Go ahead, Dranga.
Yes, it should also be noted that usually organizational factors are usually latent. They've got delayed action, and usually their consequences are always higher. For example, let's say we acquire the wrong machinery or have the wrong operating procedure. Usually the effects or the consequences are usually catastrophic, usually, as compared to the floor worker. So it should be noted all the time that usually managerial consequences or maybe top level consequences of not following the ESH system usually result in a more catastrophic and dangerous effects. And most of the times it's the lower end worker who's at risk. The other guys will be at the offices and whatnot, going about their own businesses, but the lower down worker usually suffers the effects of these misjudgments at times. So yes, I do agree with the previous speaker. Top management should be taken into account because their actions lead to more catastrophic effects on the ground. Even death usually, it's because of top management. So it should be noted and taken seriously, I think.
100% agree, Mr. Maroa. Thank you for that contribution. It would have been great if I don't know if we've got any top management here to shed a light on how it tends to transpire at the Queen level. Thank you for that. Any more additions? I see Ranga, your hand is up.
Right, thank you, Fungai. I think it's time for my challenge. Can you take us back to slide number 72?
Slide number 72. Okay.
Yes, I've heard about toasting the North Pole and who suffers the most when an accident happens. But I would love to present an emotional part of reporting, that is to the external third parties, particularly families in this instance. This is one of the most difficult duties to perform. Whoever does the duty within an organization, be it the safety practitioner, be it the top level management taking responsibilities. But oftentimes, social media has created virtual networks and communities by which we live in. And as soon as an accident happens, the word tends to get to the family informally faster than how you, as the safety practitioner, as the supervisor, as the person responsible from the organization, can actually get the message to the family in a more formal and calculated way. It is my wish as a person who went through quite an experience to challenge the regulatory authority to help us on conscientizing practitioners, companies, organizations on how best to deal with such situations and maybe foster a way of doing these things. I understand, Fungai, you mentioned something about announcing a funeral some time back. There's never the best way. You can, even if you once challenged us to practice on our own how you would tell a person bad news, but I understand that there is never the best way of announcing bad news to someone. Here you are the person responsible in the structure of your organization to go and tell a mother that I'm sorry, your son is not coming back home. He's in hospital, or he's not coming home. He's never going to be coming back home. I believe it is a challenge for us to find a way to tell both the members of the public, because these are the members of these virtual communities, not to propagate accident news to families before companies do so. I know of people who have seen their relatives' pictures from road accidents, and brushed it aside, and later on realized that I'd seen my relative in an accident. So that's my contribution in terms of announcing to the external third parties to see how best we can do it. We can never learn enough of it in school or in discussions like this, but how best can we as safety practitioners deal with such kind of situations? Maybe Fungai, you are going to assist us to have a discussion on this one day. I don't know, but I understand it's going to be an emotional topic for those who have gone through the experience. Across the board, the traffic, mines, electricity, energy sector, solar. Imagine someone working at your home. Fungai, you've just built your house, contract some solar guys. Then someone falls off the ladder from your roof. It's not your fault. But how do you go through the experience as safety practitioners? How do we help families to go through the experience? Thank you. That's my contribution.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Ranga. It's one of the most difficult things to do. And to start off with, you don't want to get used to being the one going to be delivering bad news. It's a bad sign if you're having so many of these. But more seriously, I've done it at a number of companies where I've been, where we just do a quick exercise and say, all right, guys, who amongst us volunteers to be the one to deliver the bad news? And for mock trials, team, can one of us play the role of being the deliverer of bad news, and the other one play the role of the one receiving the bad news? It's very rare where I've seen people laugh about it or do, it has an impact. And I think it's good practice as part of training, even within organizations. It helps conscientize workers to take this seriously. When you play with the emotions of people, for example, how will your family manage with you not around? And in many cases where maybe one of the either mom or dad is the breadwinner, what happens if they lose their job and can no longer do their work and the income is no longer available? And in a worst case scenario, there's a fatality. So certainly, I think it's something that, we'll have a session on, we'll schedule one of these episodes to focus on that. But it's not an easy thing. I've not met someone who says, I'm a pro at this. You don't want to be a pro, be recognized for doing that. Now, on the issue of social media, for me, it's about time. There's a few aspects to it. There's time and culture of an organization. Where an incident has happened or an accident has happened, and the right culture would have no employee should be sharing that information. And again, it's one of those where if someone is caught doing that, the consequences must be very severe. So that's a culture thing. Once it's gone on social media, you no longer have control. I've seen instances where organizations or individuals have appealed to people to delete the image. Once it's on my phone, you've got zero control. And remember that some of the recipients may not have they will likely not have the emotional attachment to the injured person or the people that have died that are being depicted in the pictures or information that is being distributed. So for them, it's just another thing, which is no different to all the other messages of incidents or accidents that are distributed on social media. So I always say to companies, this is where the strength of having the right policies, systems, and procedures already in place. We should not be making a plan when we're in, sorry, excuse the language, but we should not be making a plan when we're in the shit. We should always have the plan before. Who does our communication? How are we going to notify? Who are we notifying? When are we notifying them? And the response that takes place, the timing of it becomes very important. As you say, the worst thing that can happen is for family to find out that their beloved one is now deceased on social media. And already it sends a bad impression about the company. The reputation of the company will be in tatters or will be spoiled. And one aspect that I encourage companies to look at, I know many companies do it, but is always assessing, prioritizing your risks, like your material risk. What would be the impact on the company if a fatality occurs? Well, how would people perceive it? And a good question is, if I myself, this happened to me, would I be happy with my family receiving the message like this? And look, to be fair, also on the organizations, these are never difficult situations. When someone gets seriously injured or a fatality occurs, you also not that we're exonerating them, but you also have to give, accommodate the management, because it's also emotional for them. You talk safety every day and one of your colleagues dies. Consider where, and sometimes there may be a personal relationship between colleagues. So we also need to take into account of that. But the key thing is your systems, your procedures, your policies. Do not make a plan when you're in the shit. So no, thank you for that contribution, Ranga. And we will have a session on this, and I'll open it to the floor for additional comments. I see Darlington, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Hi, sorry. I'm not so much of a she person here, but I'm trying to follow up and thinking in my head. When you then say that communicating these sad news to the family, and then companies should actually have a policy in place of managing how the information or the messages go to the families. Are we also saying, after investigating and we find out that that person was distributed the wrong messages, or the messages, or the good message rather, but at the wrong time, not appropriately, become disciplined? Can they be disciplined for that? Are we also saying that the same companies should have that discipline procedure for such misbehavior of letting the message go out?
Okay. Yes, I think they should, just like we address all the other issues, of finance, what happens to the money or wrong actions around procurement. Similarly, just like when you start a job, many companies will have their own boarding where they take you through their policies. Certainly, I see no problem with that. But now, if you do not address that issue, right, within your policies and within your training, and then someone proceeds to share or takes a picture on site and shares it. Now, I'm sure if you call them in for disciplinary action, they'll say, oh, but I was never told this is the procedure. So that's why it's important to address these things early on. Now, that becomes a separate issue from the incident investigation, particularly when another employee is proceeded to share information outside. That's separate from the actual incident itself, but I totally believe that, yes, our policies should be in place that address those issues. And if someone breaches and if you can prove it, definitely disciplinary action should be considered. I hope that answers you, sir.
Yes, sure, it does answer me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional comments, additions, subtractions, feedback on the delivery or the content itself? Yes, Taurai, I see your microphone's on. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I wanted us to go back on the sequence of accident investigation and the findings. When we look at it's bad, not professional, when we see a cause of an accident, say an unsafe act, it points back to the supervisor and the line upwards that something should have been done to eliminate a culture of unsafe acts. But when you get an employee into a position of employment, where there is a contract and he signs, he understands, he's taken through all the procedures from induction, company policies, safety procedures. I feel if we really not dwell on that much, we continue to have these accidents in such a manner, because yes, we have spoken about the human factor, we have spoken about the machinery factor and the environment. But when you look at the whole setup here, the employee is the influencer of the environment. And at the end of the day, he is to be accountable to some extent of the environment that he is in. What I'm trying to say here is, for example, there is a pinch bar lying on the floor at the workplace for an employee. The employee decides not to pick that pinch bar for 7 hours, 55 minutes. And at 5 minutes to knock off, he trembles over the pinch bar, he falls down. Surely when you look at the setup, the employee influences the environment. And even how the machine performs. In basic safety, we say accidents are caused by, machinery cause 10% of accidents. But if you look closely at that 10% that we allocate to machinery, there is a human element where something should have been done, or the machinery, something was bypassed by the employee. But when we go to statistics, we say 10% is caused by machinery. Let's look at the influence of the worker at the environment, at the machinery, and we can actually now be in a position to see how best we can craft a training program that builds the employee to be in charge of the workstation, to be in charge of the machinery. If I draw you back in apartheid, there used to be what is called the 5 defense laws, where the employer will say, by the virtue of signing a contract with me, you understood also the dangers involved with the job. Here, the employer was trying to run away from the responsibility of accidents and injuries. But we are talking of an employer and an employee here, who at first you are saying he's responsible for his own safety, number one, and responsible for the safety of others, number two. So let's share this unsafe acting correctly so that workers also come to the party on that issue. Thank you.
No, thank you for that contribution, Taurai. So yes, I totally agree with you that employees should be held to account. They should understand what their roles and responsibilities are. And I'm sure even in legislation, it clearly spells out what those are. But I will just add on. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they should be exonerated or anything. Where they've played a part, definitely it should be made clear. And to me, every accident is preventable because there's usually an action or in a behavior that has been transpired or that has transpired or something could have been done to prevent it from happening. But an employee comes to a work site, right? They sign a contract to say that they will abide by all the rules. They are experienced, the organization will recruit based on experience. But when they come on site, the realities are every site is going to be different. The culture at every site or operation is also going to be different. So yes, by contract, they are obliged to follow the rules and they say they know their job and so forth. So going back to your point about housekeeping, the employee has left a hose or whatever you mentioned on the floor. They didn't pick it up for 7 hours, 55 minutes. And in 55 seconds and with 5 seconds left to knock off, they step in it, they slip over in the fall. Yes, it was their responsibility to pick it up and put it away. So we address that issue, but I would like to add on that. So if everywhere else on site, it is common to see hoses or crowbars or materials just left there, and the housekeeping is not done, that to me signifies a culture of poor housekeeping. Now, often you find that our training will tell employees, you must do this, you must do your housekeeping. But when we go out, there is no housekeeping being done, all right? There is no follow-up audits taking place. Yes, the instruction is there, you should do your housekeeping. But as a management, we should have a system of follow-up. Yes, the instruction is there to do it, but what follow-up are we doing and what is the enforcement? I previously worked for an organization that would have what they call ball observation, where workers would audit each other as they perform a task. And then you have the task audit observations, where now it's, scheduled and someone goes and observes. Those things are in place to understand what's taking place on the ground and to encourage and to enforce compliance to those things. So I appreciate and I totally agree with you that individuals play a big role and they should be held to account for it. But the fact that they are not doing it is a reflection to me on the organization as well. So we have to understand and address both of those factors. I hope I've responded appropriately. Hello? Any further addition?
Thank you for that clarity.
All right, thank you, Taurai. Any further comments or additions? Simon, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting and very informative presentation. I would just want to buttress what you have said about communication. Most companies do have communication policies, but I think now as the chief practitioners, we should encourage our companies to have a social media policy, because most of our communication policies do not include this. And if we do that, then we should be able to control what is posted by people on their phones or on their laptops. That is my comment.
Thank you, sir. I think that's a very valid contribution. Social media policy, we can't get away from it. It's now the reality of the world we live in, and bad news travels way faster than good news. And yes, no, I think I totally agree that organizations should have their communication protocols and how to respond to these instances where there's leaked information. Just like they tend to share the good news, they need to work out how they share the bad. So thank you for that contribution, Simon. Any additional comments? Last chance. Okay, no, I think it's been a great session. We've gone over by 50 minutes. I hope that is a good sign that it was going really well. Certainly great participation. Thank you so much to everyone that has joined in. This is our second episode session that we've had, and we'll definitely be scheduling the next one in 2 weeks. Really appreciate that engagement that we've had and the shared learnings. Certainly, thanks to Teach, who delivered on the toolbox talk in the spotlight. And I think we now have enough topics in terms of what to see in the scheduling of our next session. So thank you all. Let me see if we have a date for the next session. That will be on the 2 weeks from now on the Friday. I think that will be around 2 April, I think. Let me see here. Yes, 2 April on the Friday. Very soon, forgive us in terms of sharing the slide packs. Very soon, the domain will be up for ESH, and those will be available. Please continue to visit the Fania Safety website and our social media. We'll continue to share more information. And if you feel or want particular topics to be addressed, please feel free to send through that information as well. So thank you very much. Thank you to the team. I'd like to thank TL1 and TL1 Center for Learning for the particular support they've given with this initiative, as well as NASA, National Social Security, here in Zimbabwe for the support that they continue to give us. So we really appreciate that. And most importantly, it's you, the guests that have joined us that make it worthwhile. So thank you very much. And please stay safe and healthy. COVID is upon us. And it will be great to have you again in 2 weeks' time. So thank you. Now, if everyone could turn their cameras on for a photo, that would be greatly appreciated before we end the session. I know some of you may be in bed. We're talking about working from home. It's okay. We won't think any less of you. But yes, we'd greatly appreciate if we get our cameras on and take the photo.